Welcome back with a smiling face. Important note before starting: if you are a fan of audio stories, then our Patreon account is the best platform for you. Join us on Patreon for the best audiobooks ever. Coming Together. Episode 3. Chapter 15 to 23. I blacked out after that. I came to a few minutes later, but the rest of the night is fuzzy. I couldn't seem to stay awake and kept drifting off. Someone had dosed my drink, and everyone was sure who'd done it. Everyone except me. I kept replaying the evening. Rafe had handled my drink. More than once. He'd been the one to suggest we go someplace quieter to talk. He'd been the one to suggest we go outside. So he was the obvious choice. Except that once he'd gotten me alone, he'd done what he promised: talked. I'd kissed him first. He'd made sure it was okay before continuing. He'd asked how much I'd had to drink. He'd hesitated. And maybe that was all part of the setup, so later if I regretted what happened, he could say that I'd taken the lead and he'd just followed. Maybe he did do it. I wasn't ruling that out. I wasn't sure I believed it, though, certainly not enough to call Chief Carling, which is what Daniel wanted to do. It was strange. I remember sitting there, talking, but it was like I was watching someone else saying things I'd never say. I didn't defend Rafe. But I wouldn't let them call Chief Carling or even my parents. If it had been anyone else sitting there, I'd have been the one leading the charge, insisting the victim take action. 2 years ago, a summer guy, a grown-up, had cornered Nicole in the woods, and if Serena and I hadn't found them and scared the guy off, I'm sure she would have been raped. She hadn't wanted to tell anyone. I'd talked her into it, then escorted her to Chief Carling and sat with her while she told her parents. Now, having her there, listening to me refuse to report it. It felt wrong. But reporting it felt even more wrong. If I accused Rafe, they'd find out about Annie. If Rafe had done it, then I would have to tell someone, because he might do it again to another girl, but if I wasn't totally sure it was him, I couldn't say anything unless I was sure. I was in no condition to make a decision. I had witnesses, so it wouldn't matter much if I reported it now or in the morning. I wanted the night to think about it. Daniel wasn't happy with that, but he finally agreed, and I called my dad to come and get me. I dreamed of the cougar. I kept seeing that mark on her flank. Kept seeing her in front of me, looking at me, and I was mesmerized by her eyes. Then it wasn't her eyes at all, but Rafe's, looking into mine as I kissed him. Then we weren't kissing, we were scaling the climbing wall. Then it wasn't the wall, but the roof, climbing across the roof, jumping off the roof, flowing back and forth, the roof and the wall, flipping between them until both were gone and I was back in the dream of 2 nights before, that amazing run. This time, I wasn't alone. Rafe was beside me, and as we ran, a subtle shift brought me lower and lower, until I wasn't running on 2 legs but on 4. I looked down at the ground blurring beneath me. Beneath my paws. I jolted upright in bed, gasping for air, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Yinald Lushii. I knew that word. As I sat there, doubled over, panting and shaking, I kept hearing it over and over, and I felt that I knew it. Somewhere, somehow I knew it. When I caught my breath, the feeling passed. Of course I knew it. I'd heard the old woman say it and hadn't been able to forget it. Look it up. How? My gaze shifted to my laptop. I shook my head. There's a reason the US Army had used Navajo for codes in World War II, because it was almost impossible for anyone to decipher. I knew about a half-dozen words and struggled with them. I had no chance of spelling this one right. Try. No. I said the word aloud, startling myself. My heart pounded again. My hands trembled as I clutched the covers. Afraid of a word? How stupid was that? I was just stressed out from the party and the dreams, and it was too late to fire up my laptop. Our connection out here sucked anyway. I would look it up tomorrow, at Daniel's place. Having him there would help put it in perspective. That settled, I laid back down and fell back to sleep, right into a fresh dream. This time, I saw the cougar again, the one with the mark on her flank. Only she was chasing me. I ran through the forest, trying to get away. She was right behind me. Then I heard Rafe, his voice echoing through the forest. Maya, stop, he shouted. Don't run. It won't help. I kept running. Please, he yelled. You're only making it worse. Stop running away. You can't run away. Accept it. Accept death? Never. I ignored him and ran until my lungs burned, and still the cat was right on my heels, one leap away from ending my life. Finally I saw my salvation. The lake. As I raced up the rocks, Rafe shouted to me again. I saw him, across the water, motioning and yelling. Maya, don't. Please. Listen to me. Whatever you do, don't jump. I jumped. Icy water closed over my head. I pushed to the surface and swam, not stopping until I was in the middle of the lake. Treading water, I looked around. The cougar was back on the rocks, pacing and yowling. Rafe was on the other side. Get out, Maya. This doesn't help. It isn't safe. I ignored him. This was safe. This. Fingers closed around my ankle and yanked me under. I fought, but a hand grabbed my other leg and I kept going down, gulping water as I screamed. I could hear Rafe's voice, faint and distorted as he shouted, and I could hear the cat screaming, her cries blending with my own. As the hands pulled me down, I realized what he'd been telling me. Stop running away from the truth. The truth that followed me everywhere, like the cat. I woke up gasping and sputtering, still feeling icy water filling my lungs. I hacked and coughed until Mom came to my door. I told her not to worry, I was fine, and huddled under the covers until she was convinced. I threw off the blanket as soon as she was gone and lay there, nightshirt pulled up around my midriff as I panted. Even the remembered chill of the water wasn't enough to cool me as my heart raced. A dream. Just a crazy dream, merging the experiences of the night, the cougar and Rafe, with the issue I'd been trying to avoid all day. Serena's death. When she died, I told myself I'd find out what happened. In the year since, what had I done? Sat around and grieved, and waited for the answer to drop from the skies. Her death had been ruled an accident. No one was looking for another explanation. No one wanted to look. Did that include me? Was that what the dream really meant, my conscience telling me to stop hiding from her death and do something about it? Brendan said Mina Lee had asked about Serena. She must really have checked out Salmon Creek to know a teenager died here last year. If she was investigating the medical research, did she think it had something to do with Serena? That seemed like grasping at straws, but it might mean she'd looked at the circumstances surrounding Serena's death and seen possibilities no one here had. I needed to talk to her. I wished I hadn't given away her card. Still, it wasn't like she'd refuse to speak to me. I just needed to find out where she was staying. I'm sure Corey could get that from his mother. With that solved, I relaxed enough to drift off and I stayed asleep until past 10. Even on Sundays I can't do the sleep until noon thing because of the animals. I'm usually up before 9, but my alarm didn't ring, which meant my dad must have turned it off and fed the animals for me. I took my time getting up. Although I'd decided what to do about Serena, I hadn't made any decisions about being dosed last night. I should tell my parents. If anyone else was in my situation, I'd insist on it, badger her until she did, but if I told them and said I don't know who did it, then I couldn't come back later and accuse Rafe. But how was I going to decide whether or not to accuse Rafe? Break into his cabin and search for drugs? He wasn't stupid. He'd have gotten rid of the evidence. I thought about it while I showered and dressed, and I was still thinking about it when Mom knocked. "Someone's here to see you," she said as she came in. I hoped it was Daniel. I really needed to talk to him. But Mom wouldn't call Daniel someone. I remembered what Brendan said about Mina Lee wanting to talk to me. "Please let it be her." "Is it a woman?" "No. It's the new boy. Raphael." Mom said it slowly and had this weird look on her face, kind of concerned, and I wondered if she'd heard that I invited him to the party. I wouldn't doubt it, the way gossip travels in this town. If she had, then she'd have thought it was just me leading the charge to make the new guy feel welcome. But if he was here on a Sunday morning, maybe it was more than that, and if so, why hadn't I mentioned him? All I could think was Rafe's here. Oh God, what is he doing here? My heart pounded and it felt like terror, but it felt like excitement, too, and that scared me even more. I suppose it's about the party. Which was the truth? Just give me a sec to brush my hair. 16. Mom says that when she was little, her grandmother used to brush her hair 100 strokes to make it shine. Well, if that works, my hair must have been blinding by the time I finally got downstairs. I wished I was someone who could say I'm not feeling well and hide out in my room. But I had to face him. As I went down those steps, I was angry and confused, and outraged that he'd show up at my house. But it wasn't anger making my heart race. I kept thinking of the dreams and thinking of last night and thinking of how he'd made me feel. That scared me because I needed to be totally objective about this. I found Rafe in the living room, looking out the front windows, hands stuffed in his pockets. His hair looked like it'd been finger-combed and could probably use a wash. He wore the same clothes as last night. He didn't do it. He isn't guilty. No, I just didn't want him to be guilty. I stepped into the room. His head tilted, as if he'd heard me, and he turned. He saw me there and he stepped forward with a spark in his eyes that made my insides flip and an inner voice scream, "I can't do this." The smile disappeared fast, gaze dipping as he mumbled, "Hey! You wanted to talk to me?" He nodded. "Can we?" He looked around and I knew he was going to say, "Can we go somewhere and talk?" Then realized how that would sound, under the circumstances. "We can step out on the porch," I said, then called. "Mom? We're on the back deck. Is Dad out there?" "Somewhere." Rafe nodded. He got the message. When I whistled for Kenji after we went outside, I was probably overdoing it, but I wasn't taking any chances. We sat on the edge of the deck. Kenji tried positioning herself between us, but that was a bit much, so I nudged her down. She sat at my feet, watching Rafe. I almost hoped she'd growl at him or give some sign that she distrusted him. She didn't. I was about to speak when a yowl cut me off. Rafe jumped. I looked up to see Fitz in his favorite tree, staring at me, yellow eyes slitted, like I'd been the one who'd put him up there. "Hold on," I said. I walked toward the tree. Seeing Fitz, Rafe swung into my path. "That's a lynx," he said. "No, it's a bobcat, and he's going to keep yowling until I get him out of that tree." "Get him out," Rafe said. "I really don't think. It's okay." I grabbed the lowest branch and swung up. When I glanced down, Rafe had his hands on the limb, like he was ready to follow. "Stand back," I said. "He doesn't like strangers. So he's a pet. I don't keep wild animals." Which was true. Rafe stood there, gripping the tree. "Maya, I really don't think. I'm serious. Unless you like the ripped look for that jacket, get out of the way." I shimmied along Fitz's branch. Rafe climbed onto the bottom limb and stood. "Maya, seriously. Don't." I grabbed Fitz. He harumphed. I hefted him up, which is not easy with a 20-pound cat. Then, holding him by the scruff of the neck, I lowered him toward Rafe. Fitz's 3 legs shot out, claws extended. He spit and snarled. Rafe backed up fast. Then he looked at me, crouched on the branch, holding a spitting, 3-legged bobcat. And he laughed. Laughed so loud that Fitz let out a chirp of surprise and started struggling. I leaned down as far as I could and dropped him onto Rafe's branch. The branch dipped and Rafe nearly went flying. He motioned at the stump of Fitz's rear leg. "Former patient." I nodded. "He can climb up fine, but getting down is another story. My mom designed a tree house for him. Once it's made, I can stop doing this." Fitz jumped down and the branch bobbed again. Rafe heaved himself up, face coming nearly to mine, then he stopped and he looked at me, and it was like the last 12 hours vanished and we were back on that roof, before everything happened, staring at each other, my heart tripping. He smiled, and it was that crooked smile again, and I forgot about backing out of the way. Forgot why I should back out of the way. He lifted himself up until we were face to face, then closed his eyes and leaned forward. That's when my brain clicked on and I jerked back fast enough to make the branch dip. His eyes flew open, and he saw the look on my face and his gaze dropped as he mumbled, "Sorry." I lowered myself to stand beside him, just out of reach. "I didn't do it," he said. "And you'd admit it if you did." He swore. I glanced at the house. If my mom looked out, she could see us. If I screamed, she'd hear me. If we talked, though, she couldn't listen in. Good. I sat beside him, legs dangling. "That's the problem, isn't it?" he said, sitting, too. "I can say it wasn't me, but I'd say that even if it was. I've been up all night, trying to figure out how I can prove it. I can't. I had access to your drink. I wanted to be alone with you. Whatever that drug did to you, I'm the one who benefited. No one else." I couldn't argue with that, but he looked at me, like he was hoping I would. "I wouldn't do that, Maya." "Sure, you don't know me that well, but you said it yourself. I get a girl and I back off before I can collect the payoff. I don't need to dose girls." He stopped. That sounded unbelievably arrogant, didn't it? Kinda. But if you're trying to say that only guys who can't get girls drug them, you're wrong. It's not always about that. You're new in town. You're trying to fit in, make an impression. You've heard I don't go with local guys. You've probably heard I don't make out with near strangers at parties. Maybe that's the impression you wanted to make. The cool stud who can get any girl. Sure, if I want Daniel making an impression of my head in the nearest wall. If he caught me kissing you and he wasn't convinced it was your idea, then I'm on his blacklist. Which means I'm on his friend's blacklist. I'm on your friend's blacklist. I'm on the blacklist of everyone in this town. That seriously limits my social circle. He had a point. He continued, yeah, I've done dumb things, as I admitted last night, but think about it, if I dosed you and got you alone, would I have started rambling on like I did? Another good point. Yes, I know your reputation, he continued. So when we started heating up, I knew something might be wrong. That's why I asked if you'd been drinking. Even when you said no, I wasn't sure, but, of course I wanted to think you were just that into me. Definitely a valid point. And, let's be totally honest. If a guy gives a girl a roofie, he's not looking for a make-out session. If my hands weren't wandering by that point, they weren't going to. He shifted on the branch. I wish I could prove I didn't do it, Maya, but I can't. I can only say that it doesn't make sense. I'd risk getting the crap beat out of me by Daniel, becoming a total social outcast, and maybe even getting arrested and losing Annie. As much as I like you, one make-out session isn't worth that. And I do like you, meaning one make-out session definitely isn't worth that if it'd be the last one I'd ever get. He looked at me, like he was expecting to see something in my face, and when he didn't, he frowned. I do like you, Maya. You get that, right? Why? His frown deepened. Why what? Why do you like me? He laughed. Do you want a list? Smart, pretty, funny. That's not what I shook my head. Never mind. It seemed like I was fishing for praise. But something about it bothered me. The hot new guy comes to school, checks out all the girls and decides I'm the one he really wants. It was the ultimate fantasy, which meant there had to be an angle I was missing. Maybe it was as simple as him wanting the girl who didn't want him. I didn't know. But it bothered me. And what bothered me even more was this little part inside me that didn't really care why he was interested, was just happy that he was. I jumped out of the tree and got 2 steps away before Rafe followed, catching my sleeve and saying, Maya. I turned. You don't believe me, do you? He said. About the dosing. No, I do. He grinned that mesmerizing grin, and when I didn't move, his fingers wrapped around my elbow and he tugged me behind the tree. Before I knew it, my back was against the trunk, and he was in front of me, lips coming down to mine. I sidestepped fast. No. His lips quirked in a smile. What? You want dinner and a movie first now? You think that's funny? The smile vanished. Course not. I just think we should be able to jump back to where we were, because maybe I was dosed and maybe we went a little further and a lot faster than I like, but it's still where I wanted to go. That's what you think happened, isn't it? I wanted it, I just couldn't admit it. He stepped back and ran his hands through his hair, and I knew that's exactly what he thought. But he said, I don't know what happened. Neither do I. That's my point. I have no idea how much of it was me, and how much of it was the drug. He stepped in front of me again, hands sliding around my waist. Let's find out, then. I backed out of his grasp. You aren't getting this, are you? No, Maya, I'm not. Then I think you should leave. He sighed. Now what did I do? Nothing. I need you to back off. I softened my tone. I'll talk to you at school tomorrow, okay? But I'm here now. What? Are you on a schedule? Course not. He stepped toward me. I like you, Maya. You keep saying that. And it's a problem? I don't get this. Do you expect me to just wait until you figure things out? No. I expect that if you're interested enough, you'll wait, and if you aren't, you won't. Your choice. And it doesn't matter to you one way or the other. I never said. He waved off my protest, and strode into the forest. The crackle of twigs continued until his footsteps receded into silence. I stood there, staring after him long after he'd gone. Finally Kenji came over and nudged my hand. I patted her head and walked back toward the house. Maya. Mom called as she stepped onto the porch and looked around. Is Raphael still here? I shook my head. She squinted, trying to see my expression, but I stayed in the shadow of Fitz's tree. You should come in and have some breakfast, she said. I'm not hungry, I said. I'll check on the animals. 17. In the excitement of the cougar attack, then my party, I'd forgotten about the marten, but when I went back into the shed that morning, I couldn't deny that the wound was completely healed. Even the scar was white now, as if the injury were weeks old. The right thing to do would be to examine her leg, then let her go. But after what happened the last time, it took 10 minutes before I could bring myself to touch the marten. When I did, nothing happened. I checked the wound and picked out the stitches. The marten just lay there, calm and patient. I don't release animals here. That encourages them to stick around. Even with Fitz, I'd let him go on the other side of the park. But he'd found his way back, and after a second relocation failed, I'd given up. I had a cat carrier for transporting the small animals to their release points. I made sure the cage had been cleaned out last time I'd learned my lesson after having nearly given a rabbit heart failure by putting it in a carrier filled with fox hair. Before I reached into the marten's cage, I was so busy trying to mentally distract myself that I'd forgotten to glove up. As my hands went around the marten, the room swirled into darkness. I smelled damp earth and wet grass. Heard the scream of an eagle and my heart beat faster, legs pumping as I ran, the grass lashing me. Then too late I smelled it. Humans. I tried to veer for a tree, but something hit my back leg, pain. I jolted from the vision. As I stumbled back, I looked around frantically, terrified that I'd dropped the marten. But she was still in her cage, head cocked in confusion. The door opened and a voice said, "Hey!" I spun. Daniel stood silhouetted in the doorway. I glanced at the carrier, then the marten. I waved Daniel back out and followed. We walked to the porch, where Fitz lay stretched out on the railing. He hopped off and strolled over as we sat down. I said nothing for a moment, my mind still back in the shed. Daniel cleared his throat. Your mom said Rafe was here. Proclaiming his innocence. I think he's right. I tensed for the outrage. Daniel just waited for me to explain. I didn't detail every point but emphasized what I figured would be the best evidence to prove it to a teenage guy that Rafe hadn't tried anything more than kissing. Nothing. Daniel said. I shook my head. It was just kissing. And he asked if I'd been drinking. If I'd said yes, I think he would have stopped. Again, I waited for the outburst. Was I crazy? Clearly Rafe was the one who dosed me. Daniel nodded. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't like the guy, but, he shrugged. Your bad guy radar isn't pinging. No, he said, almost regretfully. I'm not convinced he did this either, and if you agree. I do. But who else could it have been? Well, I might have an idea, which is why I'm willing to give Rafe the benefit of the doubt, and part of the reason I came over. Nicole stopped by this morning to see if I needed help cleaning up. I think what she really wanted was to tell me something about last night. When I was in the kitchen, getting you a drink, Haley was hanging around. She could have slipped something in while I was grabbing my beer. Nicole said that. Not in so many words. I had to really work to even get her to admit she'd seen Haley near your drink. Didn't want to tattle on her friend. Exactly. But when she got to thinking about it, it made sense. Haley works at the clinic with Nicole sometimes, and she says Haley has sneaked into the drug room before. Nicole figured she's been getting Ritalin or Demerol, so she kept her mouth shut. Only there are other drugs in there, too. Haley's jealous because Rafe's taking an interest in me. Rafe left the party, so she thought she could slip roofies in my drink and I'd hook up with Brendan. She could tell Rafe about it, and he'd change his mind about me. Then Rafe shows up again and it backfires. I nodded. Haley is the most likely suspect, but it's not enough to tell Chief Carling. I just need to keep my eye on her. We both will. I'll tell the guys, too. Good. That's settled. I stood. Let's grab some food. Then I need to talk to you. Daniel got up. About you and Rafe. There is no me and Rafe. Surprise, surprise. I turned to go, but Daniel snagged my arm. You liked him, he said. I exhaled. Honestly, I don't know. Yes, I invited him to the party, and I'm sorry about not warning you. It was an open invitation. Everyone knew that. Sure, I was surprised. I didn't think you were interested in him. I wasn't. Not that way. Just, something happened at school Friday and I shook my head. The less I think about Rafe, the better, so let's eat. Then afterward, I want to talk about Serena. About how she died. I need answers. The words formed in my head, but wouldn't complete the journey out. Was bringing Daniel in on this the right thing to do? It was the natural thing. He was my best friend and I could use his help. But was it selfish? What if he was happy with the answers he had, if dragging him into some amateur investigation would only remind him of her end? Sorry. I shook my head. Never mind. You wanted to say something. It's okay. I changed my mind. He pulled back, barely a fraction, but I knew he was hurt. Why was it so easy to do that these days? For both of us. He wouldn't want to talk about something, and I'd be hurt. Or I wouldn't want to talk about something, and he'd be hurt. Or he'd invite me along with the guys, and I'd analyze every nuance of his voice and expression, worrying that he really didn't want me along, was only being polite. Or, like the other night, I'd want to comfort him, but would be worried about how he might misinterpret that. It never used to be like this. Maybe that's just part of having a close friend as a kid, you don't think anything about it. Then you're a teenager, and you can't help but think about it. I don't want to lose our friendship just because we're older now, but sometimes I swear I can feel Serena there and something happened in the shed. I blurted it without thinking. What? I laughed uneasily. That didn't sound good, did it? Cue the ominous music. I shook my head. Never mind. It was silly. I tried to walk away, but he caught my arm and when he turned me to face him, his expression sent a chill slithering down my spine. It was concern, yes. But behind that, rage simmered. Was it Rafe? He said, his voice so low it was almost a growl. Did he try something this morning? What? No. When he didn't look convinced, I said, "Come on, Daniel. If he tried anything, do you really think I'd protect him? Give me a little credit, please." "Sorry." He released my arm and the anger faded. Then he blinked. "The shed. Do you mean like what happened the other day? When you passed out?" I hesitated. Part of me wished I'd never mentioned it, but a bigger part was glad I had. I told him everything. When I finished, I waited for his reaction. Was I afraid he'd laugh? Worry about my mental health? I knew better. I knew Daniel. He listened without interrupting. Then he quietly processed it, sitting beside me on the deck, ignoring Kenji and Fitz as they approached. "Okay, the healing thing seems weird," he said finally. "But I think it seems weirder to you than it does to me. You're good at healing animals. Who knows why? If you're getting even better at it, well, it's not like you're hurting them. It bugs you, though, so I say hold off on releasing the Martin. We'll take it to Dr. Hajek and see if there's a scientific explanation. Chances are she'll just say the same thing she always does. Some people have a gift. You obviously do." He stretched his legs, getting comfortable now. "Same goes for the visions or whatever they are. You're more freaked out about them than I am." He paused. "Well, no. I'm a little freaked out, but only because they seem to come with a sudden lack of consciousness, which could be dangerous. Remember what I said about getting your parents in there with you? That goes double now. And otherwise I should just ignore the fact that every time I touch an animal, we do a body swap." "Not a body swap. You're seeing memories, I think. You know what I mean." He stretched out farther, leaning back on the porch now, face gathered in thought. It was a minute before he spoke again. "It could be temporary. Maybe stress-related. If it's not, I guess you'll have to learn to handle it. It could be part of the healing power. Imagine how helpful it would be if you actually saw what happened to the animals when they were hurt." Visions. That strikes you as just a normal extension of a healing gift." He sighed. "I don't know what you want me to say, Maya. Does it seem strange?" "Yes. Do I think you're going nuts?" "No. Maybe I should be taking this more seriously, but," he shrugged. "It doesn't seem serious." He meant it didn't feel serious. That was what mattered for Daniel. What did his gut instinct tell him? He wouldn't say that, because it sounded all touchy-feely, but it was the way he processed things. Healing an animal in less than a week and seeing visions of its trauma seemed seriously weird to me. If it didn't to him, though, how could I argue with that? "Like I said, the passing out part does worry me," he continued. "You might want to visit the clinic about that. Just don't mention the visions if I want to stay off Dr. Fodor's couch." "Exactly. Now, let's get some food. There's something I need to talk to you about." 18. I'm perfectly capable of cooking lunch. Well, making sandwiches or popping something in the microwave. Daniel could do the whole operating a stove and mixing ingredients routine. Mom insisted on making lunch, though. Dad insisted on supervising, asking me to set the table, pour drinks, etc. Normally, not their style, but they were worried about me and knew I didn't react well to hearing I'm worried. They were using meal prep as an excuse to make me hang out in the kitchen with them. The conclusion, I believe, was that I might have been upset by something to do with Rafe or the party, but I was fine now. Well, maybe not completely fine, but enough for them to back off, which they did, letting us take our lunch outside. I found this shoved under our front door this morning, Daniel said after we settled on the porch. It was Mina Lee's business card. My pulse sped up. I forced myself to sound casual as I asked, "You think we should meet? Figure out what she wants?" I paused, as if considering it. "That's not a bad idea. Turn it over." I did. On the back, she'd written the name of a library in Nanaimo, a Dewey Decimal Reference code, and a page number. "Hey," I said. "Exactly." I called her. No answer. Called again on the way here and her phone's either turned off or she's out of range. Which isn't that strange out here. We should call Corey. See where she's staying. He already told me. She's at the Braun place. I stood. Well, then, let's go talk to her. Daniel cast a pointed look at my grilled flatbread. Then he glanced up, squinting as if he were avoiding the sun, but I knew he wasn't. He was studying me, just like my parents had done. I pretended to stretch, then sat back down. "After we finish eating, I mean." He wasn't fooled, but he let it slide. Another bite of his sandwich, then he nodded. "I think we should talk to her. First, though, I want to check out that book. Drive all the way into Nanaimo to find a book, when she's staying 10 minutes away." He shrugged. "I'm curious. Got a couple of things to pick up in the city, too. We can go out for dinner, make a day of it." "Dinner? Sure." He peered at me again. "No rush, right? She's not going anywhere. And it's not like we have anything important to ask her." "No. Course not. I'm not really in a city mood today. After last night, I kind of wanted to hang out in the park, recharge my batteries. You know me." He nodded. "Sure. You do that. I'll go to Nanaimo, then talk to Ms. Lee after, and fill you in on everything tomorrow." I hesitated. I could do an end run around him and hike to the Braun place while he was in Nanaimo. Maybe it was a conversation better conducted when he wasn't around anyway. He'd find out, though, when he went to see her. Then I'd have to explain why I'd gone to see her, plus admit I'd done it behind his back. "Actually, can I change my mind?" I said. A trip to the city might be the best thing for me. A thought struck. I'd like to go back to that tattoo studio, too, see if I can talk to the old woman. I should just forget it, but it's going to keep bothering me until I find out what she was talking about. "All right. Eat and we'll go." In British Columbia, teens can get their learner's permit at 16. With that, they can drive as long as they have an L magnet on the vehicle and a licensed driver in the passenger seat. At 17, they can move up to their novice license, which needs an N magnet but no other driver. Daniel was still 16, which meant he shouldn't be driving without an adult. He did, obviously. It's not like Chief Carling was going to pull him over. That's the way it worked in Salmon Creek. Prove you're responsible and no one cares if you're driving early or having a beer in the backyard. When we went into the city, though, Daniel borrowed Brendan's N magnet for his truck. Totally illegal. That didn't bother Daniel, which might seem weird, considering he's normally the one making sure the rest of us stay in line. But his rules weren't always the same as the ones the authorities laid out. Which is probably why he'd make a better lawyer than a cop. When it came to driving, he just took extra care. He figured that made him a lot safer than the 20-year-olds whipping past in their jacked-up trucks, and since my parents were fine with him taking me to Nanaimo, they obviously agreed. When we got to the tattoo studio, it was closed. I should have figured that, being a Sunday and off-prime tourist season. I peered through the window at the dark interior. You really wanted to talk to her, didn't you? Daniel said. I know it sounds crazy. It's just. You want answers. Let's get them. He waved for me to follow. There was a diner beside the tattoo studio and a cafe beside that. Lots of restaurants here, over half of them specializing in caffeine. It's the West Coast, we love our coffee shops. He surveyed the two, then waved me to the cafe. He held the door for me and an elderly couple who were leaving, then followed me. Inside, he scanned the customers and staff as if looking for someone he knew. Sizing them up. It was a knack he had, like picking out people who might be a threat. After a few seconds, he prodded me to an older woman behind the counter. As soon as she saw him, she smiled, eyes crinkling, like he reminded her of her grandson or a cute boy she'd gone out with in school. Daniel ordered a couple of muffins, then said, "We were just over at the tattoo place. We saw it was closed today." She frowned. "You kids aren't thinking of getting one, are you? I know they're popular, but it's not something you should be doing at your age." "No, nothing like that," Daniel said. "We were actually looking for the artist's aunt. They both live over the shop. Just go around back, look for the delivery sign, and head up the stairs. The apartment door is at the top." 2 minutes after Daniel knocked, Dina's aunt peeked out the window, saw me, and let the curtain fall. Daniel kept knocking, getting louder, until finally the woman yanked open the inside door, her hand darting out to lock the screen. "What?" she said. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say. Polite, respectful, deferential. When she locked that screen, though, the speech flew out of my head and I said, "What did you mean, calling me a witch?" "Exactly what I said. Now go away." She started to close the door. With one wrench on the screen door handle, Daniel snapped the lock. He yanked the door open and caught the inside door before the old woman could close it. "We're not coming in," he said. "I just want you to answer my friend's question. You insulted her, and you owe her an explanation. She says you called her something else. Yinald Lushii." The old woman's lip curled as she said it. "What does it mean?" I asked. The old woman snorted. "Why do you care? Obviously it won't mean anything to you. You don't know your language. You don't know your heritage. The Dine shunned you. Sent you away to be raised by strangers." She asked what the word means, Daniel said. And I said. She asked what the word means. Daniel's voice took on a rumbling tone he used when someone wouldn't listen to him. The old woman's gaze rose to his as if drawn there against her will. They looked at each other for at least 5 seconds. Then she made a strange noise, deep in her throat, and when she spoke, she spit out the word, like she couldn't help herself. "Skinwalker," she said. And slammed the door. 19. We walked toward the Harbourfront Branch Library, just across the road and down the street from the tattoo studio. A guy was playing his guitar out front as tourists barreled past, eyes averted. I dropped a toonie in his hat. Daniel did the same, the $2 coins clinking in the empty hat. We sat down. I took out my muffin from the cafe and got one bite before Daniel said, "I take it you know what a skinwalker is or we'd be in the library looking it up. And I take it you're upset about it because you haven't said a word since we left that apartment." "Not upset. Just feeling dumb for not figuring it out on my own. A skinwalker is a Navajo witch, which is exactly what she called me. It's not a good witch. Or something they dress up as for Halloween. For some, skinwalkers are really out there, cursing people. The tattoo artist said her aunt used to live with the Navajo. A folklorist. She would have heard all the stories. At the time, I'm sure that's all they were, but now, with the dementia or whatever, she's confused and thinks they're real. Are skinwalkers a kind of shapeshifter? Like werewolves? I nodded. They're supposed to be able to take on different forms, usually coyotes and wolves. So this woman, who used to study those legends, knows you're Navajo, sees what looks like a paw print birthmark, and thinks you're a skinwalker. I've never heard of them being marked, but maybe she has. A regional version of the legend. Anyway, I have my answers so I can stop worrying, which is good, because I have more than enough to worry about these days. You want to talk about it? Not much to say. It's just a bunch of things hitting at once and it's like they're feeding on each other, making them all worse. The tattoo place problem. The cougar problem. The Rafe problem. You're really upset about him, aren't you? I'm really confused about him. So let's talk about happier subjects. You said Nicole came over this morning. I bumped his shoulder and grinned. I take it that means last night went well. He stared down at his untouched muffin. Or not, I said. He put the muffin back in the bag. Yet. It didn't. I mean, it was fine. We talked. He shrugged. I gave it a shot, but it's not going anywhere, Maya. I know you think I'm still hung up on Serena. I'm not. He glanced over. I'm really not. I miss her and I wish to God I could have. His voice caught and he looked away. The bits of muffin in my stomach turned to lead pellets. It was me, I said. I'm the one who saw her go under. I'm the one who could have saved her. If I'd brought Kenji. If I'd learned to swim better. If I hadn't panicked, thinking I was drowning. No, he said firmly. Whatever happened out there, we did our best. I know you did and you know I did, and we're not going to get into it again. We're not. Okay. I tried to look away, but his gaze skewered me. I know you feel guilty and you know I do, but that has nothing to do with me dating again. It doesn't. I nodded. I miss Serena and I wish she was still here, but even if she was, I'm not sure. He swallowed hard. His jaw worked. Then he said, slowly, it's not going to happen with Nicole, Maya. She's cute and she's nice, but that's... He shifted, rolling his shoulders. I don't know how to say this without being cruel. Go ahead. It'd never get back to her. You know that. He nodded. With Nicole, cute and nice is all you get. There's nothing else there. The same reason you don't want her as a new best friend is the same reason I don't want her as a girlfriend. I know you think maybe that would be good for me, someone who won't demand a lot, but I'm okay. He looked at me. It's you I'm worried about. I turned away to toss my muffin in the trash. I'm fine. I know why you want to talk to Mina Lee, he said. You want to find out if she knows anything about Serena's death. I stopped, hand still over the garbage can. His voice dropped. You want to know how she died? Why she died? You want answers. I dropped the muffin. I know it was probably a freak accident. I know I'll never get a why, because there isn't one. I know that this reporter almost certainly doesn't have any answers for me. I just want I faced him. I need to ask. He looked like he wanted to say something. Even opened his mouth. Then he snapped it shut and nodded. Let's check out that book first, so we know what her message meant before we confront her. Reference books were on the second floor of the library. We found the one Mina Lee put on the card and took it to my favorite spot, a lone table on the far side of the stacks where light streamed through the window. The book was an old text on agrarian cults that hadn't been checked out in years. Big shock there. Satanic cults, drug cults, I'm sure they all get their share of interest. But agricultural cults? I didn't even know there were such things. Daniel turned to the page as I looked over his shoulder. One word caught my eye. Witches. I said. Shouldn't this have been sent to me? Not witches, he said, pointing. Witch hunters. An Italian cult of witch hunters. Okay, so what's the connection to you? Your parents are Italian and you like fighting. Oh my God. You're a witch hunter. I'm a witch. Hate to break it to you, Daniel, but if you're a witch hunter, you're doing it wrong. He gave me a sidelong smile. Maybe it's not that kind of hunting. Then you're definitely doing it wrong. He laughed and we continued reading, trying to find something, anything that would tell us why Mina wanted Daniel to see this. The whole 2-page spread was about this cult. The Benandanti, which translated to good walkers. Apparently, they believed that, on certain nights of the year, their spirits left their bodies and went out to protect the crops by fighting evil witches. This wasn't just a myth, either. Like some people claimed to be skinwalkers, some claimed to be Benandanti. Or they did before the Inquisition, when they were rounded up and executed as witches. If they insisted they had supernatural powers, then they were also witches, and it didn't matter that they were supposedly using those powers for good and for the benefit of the Catholic Church. They were evil. So they were hunted and killed. It was only when Daniel turned the page that we figured out why Mina directed him to this book. There, written at the end of the section on the Benandanti, was a note. If you want to know the truth about Salmon Creek, call me. A phone number followed. Daniel flipped over the card Mina had left him. The number was the same as her cell. Okay, does this make any sense at all? He said. Why not just write the message on the back of the card? 2 possible reasons. 1. She was afraid someone else would find the card. So she found a book no one was likely to check out. 2. I looked around the library. She's waiting for you to show up, hoping to talk to you away from town. Okay, but, the truth about Salmon Creek. I snorted. She wants you to tell her the so-called truth. Proof of animal testing, horrific medical experiments. I shook my head. Call her again. I'll skulk around, see if she's here. Mina wasn't at the library or outside it. Nor was she answering her phone. Before we left, I wanted to look up skinwalkers. No, I wasn't obsessing. I had my answer and I was happy with it. But I was curious about the paw print birthmark connection. The more information I had, the easier it would be for me to mentally file the whole thing and forget it. Most of what we found on skinwalkers was fiction. We only dug up a few brief references in books on native beliefs and occult mythology. The Navajo don't like to talk about them. Like I said, some believe skinwalkers really exist. Treating them lightly invites trouble. Those references did confirm what I told Daniel. Skinwalkers are evil witches who cast curses and take on the form of animals, usually canines. When we checked the internet, we did find one reference to them also shifting into bear form, but not cat, and no mention of them bearing any kind of mark, let alone a paw print. Clearly just an old woman's ramblings. I was ready to pay a visit to Mina Lee. Daniel wanted food. Now, I know teenage guys like to eat. Teenage wrestlers really like to eat. Well, unless they're trying to get into a lower weight class, but Daniel never does that. So, it wasn't surprising that he'd want to grab food. I feel like fish, he said. Let's swing by Pirate Chips. Hard to eat fish and chips while you're driving, I said. We'll dine in. He started toward the sidewalk. When he realized I wasn't following, he turned. You don't need to talk to her about Serena, I said. What? I'm the one who wants answers, not you. I get that. I can do this alone. I'm not. He cut off the word with a snap. I'm tired of playing the grieving boyfriend, okay? It's been a year, and still everyone makes me feel like. He stopped and turned his back. Makes you feel like what? I moved up beside him. Just, stop doing that, okay? Stop pussyfooting around the subject of Serena. Stop treating me like I'm dying of a broken heart. Stop making me feel like I should be. He rubbed his mouth. That didn't come out right. I don't mean. Of course, I miss her. She was a friend. A really good friend. I'm just tired of being treated like the heartbroken boyfriend when you want to move on. Is that why it's not working with Nicole? You feel guilty because you want to date again. He threw up his hands and let out a growl of frustration that made passing tourists decide the other side of the street looked much more interesting. As he watched them cross, his growl turned to a laugh. He shook his head at me. The only thing holding me back from dating Nicole is a complete lack of interest, okay? As for Serena, I want answers, too. I've wanted them for a while, but since we weren't discussing it and, yes, that's partly my fault, not wanting to upset you. I've never said so. I do want to talk to Mina Lee and see what she knows, and the only reason I'm stalling is because I've got something to say first and I'd really rather be sitting in a public place when it happens. So I won't storm off. Exactly. I'd never do that, Daniel. I stepped closer and looked up at him. You have the keys, and it's a very, very long walk. I snagged the keys from his pocket and took off. I easily darted around a gaggle of senior citizens nearly blocking the sidewalk. Daniel didn't have as much luck, and I heard him apologizing amid gasps and harumphs. I raced toward the harbor. I was rounding the local theater, planning to circle back, when Daniel's shout pulled me up short. I turned. He barreled toward me, his eyes wide with alarm. Right, like I was falling for that one. I started to run again. I should have been able to outpace him easily. I always could. But the next thing I knew, I was being tackled. He knocked me into an alcove, both of us hitting the wall, then collapsing to the ground. Stay down, he said. Not much chance of doing anything else with him on top of me. But when I glanced up into his eyes, I saw that the panic wasn't fake. He looked around as if expecting a posse of armed gunmen to round the corner at any moment. When footsteps sounded, he tensed, muscles bunching, prepared to leap up and defend us against. Two preteen boys passed the alcove. One of them saw us and whispered to his friend. They grinned our way and shot Daniel a thumbs up. When they'd gone by, I pushed him off me. Okay, I might have overreacted, he said as we sat up. You think? He pushed to his feet and looked around. I thought I saw someone. Where? He looked around. I don't know. Down there maybe. He pointed along the wharf. I was running after you and it happened so fast, I didn't get a good look. Was it a man? Woman? Young? Old? I'm not sure. He exhaled and leaned against the wall. Okay, that sounds nuts. I'm not even sure I saw someone. You sensed someone. He made a face. Now that really sounds nuts. Hey, if you're okay with me imagining myself as a pine marten, I'm okay with you sensing unseen assailants. He laughed. Mina Lee was right. The isolation is driving us crazy. We just hadn't realized it yet. Not the isolation. The mad science experiments. They've spiked the water with hallucinogens. I headed back to the sidewalk. Your instincts are usually pretty good, though. Maybe Mina is lurking around here and you caught a glimpse of her. Let's wander a bit, see if we spot anyone. 20. We roamed the docks and side streets for a while, but Daniel didn't pick up any more hints of danger. Had there ever been a threat? I don't know. Daniel's always been protective, but it's gotten worse in the last year. Since Serena's death. Maybe this was his way of dealing with the guilt. He couldn't save her, so now he was on hyper alert with me, and being outside Salmon Creek only made him more anxious. Finally, we headed to Pirate Chips on Commercial. It's a tiny place, 7 counter seats and barely room to turn around. The best spot to sit is on the bench out front, near the wooden pirate. It's usually filled with teens, but today, maybe because it was Sunday, we had it to ourselves. I got pierogies and powden. Daniel ordered his usual, fish and a deep-fried Aero bar with ice cream. I didn't comment on the bar. I used to, until he pointed out that it was no worse than my powden fries with gravy and cheese curds. You wanted to talk to me, I said when we were halfway through our meal. Or have you decided you'd rather not incur my wrath? He grinned. Sorry, Maya, but your wrath isn't all that frightening. He leaned back on the bench and let out a sigh. You are going to be mad at me, though. He spooned off a chunk of his bar before continuing. When Corey said the reporter asked about Serena, it reminded me of stuff that happened right before she died. I stopped in mid-bite, stomach clenching. Serena was going to talk to you about it, but she didn't get a chance. After she died, I was afraid it would seem like she'd confided in me and not you, and you didn't need that. What about? She'd been feeling off, he said. Not sick. Just, off. Run down no matter how much sleep she got. You were prepping for that Labor Day track meet, and Brendan had just sprained his ankle, sidelining him. You were under a lot of pressure to cover for him, and she didn't want you worrying about her. She had that singing competition coming up, so she was stressed and she figured that was the problem. She only told me because we were supposed to go to Nanaimo to catch a movie and she had to beg off. Her mom and dad were making her go to the clinic. He set his spoon down in the bowl. They gave her meds, but they were too strong. She went from feeling tired to being hyper and restless. Her mom called the clinic, and they told her Serena should stop taking them and come back in on Monday morning. Only by Monday. She'd drowned, I murmured. When did her mom call about it? Saturday, when Serena was getting ready to go meet you at the lake. So she'd probably already taken them for the day. You think that had something to do with her death? Not at first. Sure, she was hyper, like she'd had a couple of energy drinks, but if I didn't know about the meds, I'd have chalked it up to a good mood. I wouldn't have suggested she skip swimming. It was only later that I started to wonder. What's always annoyed me most is how it happened to her. How does a champion swimmer drown in a lake she's swum in all her life? The obvious answer is a cramp, of course. But Serena never got them. You think the medication did something? I think it's possible. They said it was new. Around here, new meant it was a drug they were researching at the lab. They only use those with us if the drugs are at the very end of the testing regime. They're convinced it's safe, and they're giving it to us because it's the best around, not because we're guinea pigs. But that won't fly in court. Daniel continued, if a side effect caused her death, they'd be ruined. So they hush it up. They jump at the chance to let Serena's parents relocate. Now this woman is in town, a reporter or a spy, cozying up to the kids and asking about Serena. We need to talk to her. Mina Lee was renting a cottage outside town. That wasn't unusual. There were no motels, no inns, no bed and breakfasts. All part of Salmon Creek's attitude toward tourists in general, which was kind of like their attitude toward wildlife within the town limits. Treat them with civility and respect, but don't give them any excuse to stick around. The Braun place was the nearest rental property. We knew exactly where it was. Knew how to get in, too. There was a key in the shed. The cottage was Salmon Creek's version of Makeout Point, and was a whole lot more comfortable than the back seat of a car. Not that I'd know. Bringing a summer guy to a place with beds sent a message I was nowhere near ready to send. For town kids, though, while I'm sure some of them had just used it as a place to get some privacy. Not exactly fair to the owners, but kids made sure they left it the way they found it, so the Brauns never caught on. When we'd driven up, there was a rental car in the drive, which suggested Mina Lee was there. We knocked, but no one answered. We peered through the windows. All the lights were off and there was no sign of her. We walked over and shouted by the path leading into the woods. No answer. Either she was out for an evening hike or she'd walked into town, hoping it'd be easier to sneak around without her car. I mentioned the key to Daniel, but he didn't like the idea of snooping through her stuff, and I had to agree that, no matter how badly I wanted answers, that crossed a line. We'd just have to keep phoning her. We could see that her stuff was still inside, so at least she hadn't left yet. Daniel and I tended my animals, then did homework at my place until 9. I didn't stay up long after that. I was exhausted, and fell into a nightmare-free sleep. I'd solved the mystery of the old woman. I hadn't seen a cougar all day. I was taking steps to find out what happened to Serena. And as for Rafe, well, I was pretty sure that door was closed, so apparently my subconscious wasn't going to worry about it. I slept and I slept well. Slept a little too well, actually. I woke to a text from Daniel asking if he could pick me up early and we'd swing by the Braun place, talk to Mina before school. By the time I got his message, it was already too late, especially since I didn't want to ask Dad to feed the animals again. I called Daniel. He said that was fine. After he sent the text, he realized an early morning visit might not be the best way to get on Mina's good side. We'd go later. I got to school with no expectation that Rafe would speak to me. No expectation that he'd pay any attention to me at all. Yet as often as I told myself it was over, I hoped it wasn't. As often as I told myself I was happy if it was over, I wasn't. So when Daniel and I walked from the parking lot and saw Rafe there, I was sure that meant something. And apparently, it did. It meant he knew everyone thought he'd dosed me at the party and he was there to meet his accusers head-on. We were both disappointed. Rafe made no attempt to speak to me. No one made any attempt to confront him about Saturday night. Daniel had gotten the word out yesterday that as far as we were concerned, Rafe hadn't done it. If Rafe had totally snubbed me, then I'd know he was still mad, which meant he felt something. But he acted like he would have a week ago. It was as if that connection between us never happened, which made it clear that it had just happened for me. The only thing that hurt worse was the humiliation of knowing I'd fallen for him, just like every other girl, and ended up like them, mooning over him. I wanted to curl up in a hole. I didn't. I had to face the problem, which meant I had to face Rafe. Despite what Daniel had said, there were still rumblings. Corey and Brendan shot Rafe a few glances that suggested he'd better not be caught alone with them in the locker room. Trouble was brewing. To prove that I didn't think Rafe had dosed me, I needed to suck it up and be seen talking to him. Easier said than done. He wasn't avoiding me, but when I tried to find him on our 10-minute break between morning classes, he was nowhere to be seen. The same couldn't be said for Haley. When I turned into an empty hall, she cornered me. "I didn't appreciate that stunt you pulled at the party," she said. "Walking in on me and Corey so Rafe could see us together. It was a mistake. The door was closed. And I didn't hear anyone inside. An honest mistake. More honest than, say, spiking someone's drink, hoping she'll get caught with another guy. Only she gets caught with the guy, which kind of ruined the whole thing." Haley stared at me, then said, "You think I'm the one who dosed your drink? Hoping what? That you'd let Brendan finally get a shot at you? You'd discover you have the hots for Daniel? Please. I don't think anyone put anything in your drink. I think you faked it." "Faked it? Sure. You get all slutty with Rafe. You freak out. You cry date rape drug." "Excuse me," said a voice behind us. We turned to see Sam bearing down on Haley. "Did you just say what I think you said? You'd better be damned sure of your facts before you accuse any girl of that. What if someone slips you a roofie? Worse yet, rapes you while you're dosed? Would you want anyone even suggesting you faked it?" I expected Haley to tell Sam to go to HLL. She didn't. She actually flushed, gaze dropping as she muttered, "I didn't mean it like that. I bet you'd never have said it if it wasn't Maya. What's your problem with her, anyway? Some kind of cliched popular girls rivalry? Cheerleader versus valedictorian? Newsflash, Haley rivalries only work if both sides realize they're rivals." Haley walked away. "See," Sam said, "that's why I don't want to be popular." I laughed, and we headed to class. I decided to track Rafe down after lunch, when everyone had gone outside to play basketball. I excused myself from the game and went in search of him, planning to repeat my offer to visit Annie. I suspected he wouldn't take me up on it, but I'd make the effort. It took me a while to find him. Finally, I rounded the back corner of the school to see him there, hidden in a doorway. He was leaning back, smiling his fake smile not at me, but at the girl standing in front of him. He leaned toward her, talking, his fingers resting on her arm, enwrapped in conversation, with Haley Morris. 21. I backed around the corner so fast I stumbled into one of the little kids. I apologized, then broke into a fast walk and didn't stop until I was in the bathroom. I would say my humiliation was complete at that point. But it wasn't. The end of lunch bell rang, we went back to class, and there were 2 empty seats in our class, Rafe's and Haley's, and they stayed empty for the rest of the afternoon. I was looking forward to my visit to Mina with Daniel, which I hoped would slap thoughts of Rafe out of my head. Then, in last class, the boxing coach came by and told the guys that he needed to reschedule tomorrow's early morning meeting for 4:30 today. So no visit. Daniel knew something was annoyed me and insisted on driving me to the park gates. He promised to call me later so we could pay Mina a visit that night. Kenji I had been waiting at the gate and walked home beside me as usual. Otherwise, the woods were silent and still. I caught a whiff of what could have been smoke. I hoped not. Last night Dad had said a small outbreak of fire had been spreading inland. Luckily, that's mostly uninhabited wilderness, and they hope to have any blazes under control soon. Salmon Creek had once been evacuated for wildfires before we moved here, but it had just been a precaution. Still, it worried me. Nothing is more devastating to a forest than fire. It was enough to make me wish for our typically rainy fall weather. As I approached the house, I heard someone sawing wood. Had Walter, Dad's seasonal assistant, come back to Salmon Creek to help Dad because of the wildfires? Was he working on Fitz's treehouse in the meantime? It would be a good ending to a lousy day, but when I didn't see Walter's truck in the lane, I figured Dad was cutting up firewood. When I rounded the house to say hi to him, I saw a figure in the yard, using a handsaw on a small stack of boards. Fitz was stretched out in a sunny patch by his feet. I stopped and stared. Stared so long that Kenji I whined and nudged my hand. Rafe turned and saw me. He brushed his hair back and smiled, the crooked real smile that made my breath catch. He waved at the pile of wood. Beside it was the blueprint for Fitz's treehouse. I owe you a birthday present. You mentioned this yesterday. I asked your mom, and she said it would be all right if I gave it a shot. Can't promise anything, but I'm pretty good with a hammer and saw. Oh. A stupid thing to say, but all I could think of. The smile fell. Or if you'd rather I didn't. No, that's. Thanks. It's just that I have no idea where this came from, and what you're doing here, and why you're doing this. I looked at him. You didn't say a word to me at school today. You didn't say a word to me. I was going to. I wanted to talk to you about visiting Annie, but you were with Haley. Yeah, I heard the rumor that she'd been the one who dosed you. I figured if I could prove it, that might help. She thought I was mad at you, so I used that, chatting her up, trying to get her to admit she'd done it. Nothing, though. You didn't come back after lunch. Came here to see if I could work on this. Surprise you. Haley left, too. Yeah, she's, over by McGill Lake waiting for me. Or she was. I said I was cutting out early, heading there for a swim, hinted she was welcome to join me. I was hoping that would get her to spill about the drugs. Not the nicest thing I've ever done, but if she did dose you, she deserves it, and if she didn't, maybe she'll decide I'm a total jerk and back off. He stepped toward me. I was a jerk yesterday, Maya, and I don't blame you for backing off. But you said you were confused, and so was I. Because of the drug thing. Not just that. I wasn't sure about the party, if you were inviting me because you wanted me there or you just wanted to be nice after meeting Annie. I finally decided to go and I wasn't expecting anything, but then it started out good. Really good. The climb and us talking. And then you went back to your friends, which I totally understood. But I figured maybe it was a hint, too. You'd played good hostess, and your job was done. So I took off for a while. Checked in on Annie. Came back and, bam, everything was good again. We go up to the roof and things are really good, even after I made an ass of myself confessing all that stuff. But then I find out you were drugged, so I don't know if you do like me or it was the dope. I spend the night worrying about it. I talk to you. Everything seems cool again, only it's not cool and I get the feeling you'd be a whole lot happier if I just went away and stayed away. He wasn't wrong. About any of it. Even the last part. But happier wasn't the right word. More like relieved. Whatever was happening between us, it was too much, too fast, and I worried I was going to get hurt. I'd never been hurt before, not like that. When I went out with guys, I liked it fun and casual. I had a good time while they were around, and when they left, I was okay with that. But if Rafe said he was leaving, I wouldn't be okay with that, and it scared me. So, he said when I didn't answer. I'm here doing something to apologize, because I know that I handled yesterday badly. I pushed too hard, too fast, and stormed off in a temper when you needed me to slow down. It won't happen again. I'd like to turn back the clock to Saturday night, when we were talking, hanging out. I promise not to try to get you back into the woods. He paused. For at least 48 hours. I laughed. So you are on a schedule? No, I'm impatient. But I will wait. For 48 hours. And if there's no makeout session by then, time's up. No. I said I won't try for 48 hours. What happens after that is up to you. He met my gaze. It always will be. My cheeks heated. I glanced over at the pile of wood and tools. You don't have to do that. I want to. He picked up the saw as I crouched to pet Fitz. Like I said, Mom was a carver. Annie got her creative talent, but I learned the woodworking stuff. He placed another plank on the saw boards. I straightened. I should probably say hi to my parents. Can I get you a drink? Water would be good. I picked up my backpack and went in the rear door. My parents were in the kitchen. Mom was chopping vegetables at the sink and Dad was sitting at the table, both facing the window with a clear view of the backyard, and Rafe. We did the usual "how was your day" stuff, but it was awkward, like we were all trying very hard not to be the first to mention the new guy in our yard. Finally, I thanked Mom for letting him take a shot at the plans. He seems to know what he's doing, she said. And it is a nice gesture. Very sweet. She said sweet in a weird way, like it surprised her or like she wasn't sure what to make of it. Dad said, I'd be a lot more impressed if he wasn't skipping school to do it. His tone told me he wouldn't be impressed at all, school or no school. Neither seemed particularly thrilled to have him in our backyard. I wondered what they'd heard about him. No, strike that. I didn't need to wonder. If anything negative was being said about the new boy, they'd heard it. My parents weren't as involved in the town as others, but that only meant they heard gossip the next day rather than within the hour. So, Mom said, chopping a pepper from the garden. I didn't know you were friends with Raphael. I shrugged as I added ice to an empty glass. It's recent. She pushed the peppers into a bowl. That treehouse is a big undertaking. More than I'd expect from a new friend. Are you seeing him? Dad cut in. Dating? I don't know. How can you not know? Either you are or. Rick, Mom said. I filled a glass with water and took a couple cans of pop. Grabbed granola bars, too. Then I said, it seems to be heading that way. Is it a problem? Dad looked like he wanted to say, yes, but only pressed his lips together and looked at Mom. She took a cucumber from the pile of vegetables, and I knew I'd hurt her feelings. Normally, I'd come home and say, hey, Mom, I met this guy, and tell her all about him. But this was different. I wasn't ready to talk about Rafe until I had it worked out myself. If you have a concern, I didn't finish, because I wasn't sure how to. Was I saying I wouldn't go out with a guy if they were worried? Normally, yes. With Rafe, no. It wouldn't matter what they thought or said. I had to make my own choices here, pay the price if I made the wrong ones. Just be careful, Mom said. I always am. I kissed her cheek and gave Dad a hug, and I'm not sure if that helped or not. Rafe and I talked for over an hour as he worked. Once we started, the conversation just kept going, from one topic to another. I sat on the grass, dividing my attention between Fitz and Kenji. It was after 5 when he looked up at the blazing sun, wiped his forehead and said, "I was just thinking about this afternoon, when I mentioned that swim to Haley. I could really go for one now, if you're game." When I didn't answer, he glanced over, squinting as he tried to see my expression. "I don't really swim." "Me neither. Just paddle around, cool off." The sun went behind the clouds and he got a good look at my face. "That's not what you mean, is it?" "I just don't swim much lately, and the only lake in easy walking distance is the one where your friend drowned last year." He put down the hammer and shook his head. "I'm sorry. That was really inconsiderate." "No, it wasn't." I got to my feet. "We could, but I'd just rather not. If you want to do something, there's a place I can show you." "For climbing?" "Not exactly the break you had in mind, but there's an overlook at the top. It's a great view." "Sure." I had to tell my parents. I stepped just inside the screen door and said we were going for a walk, which got a long moment of silence. "Just to the overlook," I said. "We'll take Kenji." "And your cell phone," Rafe said, coming up to the door. "Don't forget your cell, because if I fall, I'm screwed." "I don't have one." "Smooth." He obviously knew my parents weren't impressed with him. If he took any offense at that, he didn't show it, just added, "I'll have her back by dinner." "Would you like to join us, Raphael?" my mom asked. "Or do you go by Rafe?" "Usually." A disarming grin. "Unless I'm in trouble." I opened the door and motioned him in as he continued, "About dinner, I appreciate that, but my sister will be expecting me." "Another night then," Mom said. "Maybe on the weekend we can have a barbecue, and invite your sister." "Or," I said, turning to Rafe, "if you want to skip the whole awkward meet the family social event, you could just submit your life story, including your views on politics, religion, and every social issue imaginable, along with anything else you think they might need to conduct a thorough background check." Mom sighed. "I really don't know why we even bother trying to be subtle around you." "Neither do I. It's not like he isn't going to realize he's being vetted as daughter dating material." Rafe grinned. "So we are dating?" "No. You have to pass the parental exam first. It'll take you a while to compile the data. They'd like it in triplicate." I turned to my parents. "We have Kenji. We have my cell phone. Since we aren't yet officially dating, I'm sure you'll agree that's all the protection we need." Dad choked on his coffee. Mom waved us to the door. "Go. Have fun. Dinner will be at 6:30. 22. The cliff was only a 10-minute walk from the house. There was no easy way up, so Kenji had to stay at the bottom. She was used to that and just staked out her customary spot. I left my jacket with her. Rafe did, too. This was tougher than the wall. Natural cliffs don't come with conveniently spaced holds and holes. I'd done it hundreds of times, though, so I knew the easiest path and showed Rafe. It didn't matter that this wasn't a race. When we started climbing, it was like the first time, a heart-pounding, palm-sweating, adrenaline-pumping dizzy runner's high. I didn't deliberately check my speed, but when we neared the top, Rafe was still beside me. I slowed and he was right there, his face inches from mine. He grinned, that blazing grin now, hair plastered to his face, eyes glittering. I leaned over and kissed him. He hesitated for about a nanosecond, like he really hadn't expected that, and I laughed. Then he kissed me back, a light kiss, almost teasing, making me shiver. Probably not the safest place to make out, I murmured, pulling back to glance at the ground, 50 feet below. I don't care if you don't, he said. We kissed until he tried to shift closer and nearly lost his foothold. I pulled away and scrambled up the last few feet. When he reached the top, I was standing there. He grinned and stepped toward me. I stepped back. His grin widened. I glanced over my shoulder. The cliff topped out on a hill, with forest stretching behind us, the mountains a distant backdrop. Rafe said. If you run, I'll chase. You know how much I like that part. All the more reason to do it. His breath hitched and the look in his eyes made me want to run. I didn't care how silly or childish it was, I wanted to run so badly I could imagine it, the smell of the forest, the wind rushing past, the pounding of his feet right behind me. Suddenly he was right there, his mouth on mine, my arms around his neck. Then he stopped. He caught my arms and backed up, studying my face. Has anyone had access to your drinks recently? He said. Any strange allergic reactions? Bug bites? Shut up. He ducked out of the way as I took a mock swing at him. Then he realized we were closer to the edge of the cliff than he thought, veered fast, and stumbled, toppling into the brush. Sorry, I said, hurrying over to him. Are you? As I bent, he tried to snag my leg and yank me down, but I danced back out of reach. Did you really think I'd fall for that? I said. Hoping. I laughed. He got to his feet. I backed up and glanced over my shoulder. I'm warning you, he said. You don't want to run. Why not? Because I'm faster than you. Think so? Know so, and when I catch you. I took off. I ran across the open field atop the cliff, and quickly realized that was a mistake. He might not be faster than me, but he was fast enough that I could hear him right on my heels. I swerved into the woods. Normally, that's where my advantage lies. Runners are accustomed to open ground. I actually prefer the forest, and I can dodge and dart around trees with barely a hitch in my pace. That's why hurdles are my best event. Rafe fell back a little, but then gained on me when I slowed to skirt thick brush. As we ran, bits of my dream slid back, and everything seemed to get sharper, more vivid. The bright greens of the conifers and the yellows and reds of the rare deciduous trees became a blur of color. Our pounding footfalls muted into the rhythmic thump-thump, thump-thump of a heartbeat. I could hear him right behind me. More than that, I swore I could feel his breath on my neck, and it made me run faster, the air slicing past me, that thump-thump filling my head, pulse racing, knowing that when he caught me, a yowl stopped me short. Rafe's sneakers crunched dry needles as he slid to a halt behind me. Maya. Rafe said. Look up. There, crouched on a branch 10 feet above us, was Marv. Something lay at his feet. Marv picked up his kill. Then he leaped. I stumbled back. Rafe yanked me against him, his arms around me, both of us still facing the cougar. The cat looked at Rafe, yellow eyes narrowing. His lips curled. He dropped his meal and snarled. Step back, I whispered. Marv paced to one side, gaze locked on Rafe, still growling. Step back, I said again. Are you sure? I nodded. Rafe hesitated and I could tell he didn't want to, but after a moment he said, okay, and carefully moved away. The cougar stopped snarling and grunted, as if satisfied. Then he picked up what looked like a chewed. As he walked toward me, Rafe whispered, "I've got you covered." It wasn't easy to stand still as a huge cougar came toward me. To do anything else, though, would be stupid. His body language was casual, no sign of impending attack, and I had to trust that. Maybe he thought he'd rescued me from Rafe. I only know that I didn't sense a threat. When Marv got within a few feet, he tossed the deer haunch into the long grass at my feet. Then, with a final snarl and glare at Rafe, he turned and ambled into the forest. I looked down at the haunch, mostly hidden in the long grass. I managed a laugh. I guess this is like a house cat bringing its owner a dead mouse. Rafe didn't laugh back. As I turned, I saw he wasn't even smiling, just staring after Marv. "We should get back to the house," I said. I expected him to make a joke about the cougar spoiling the mood, but he just nodded as he stared into the forest. "Hey," I said, stepping toward him. "You still with me?" "Sorry." He swung his gaze back toward me. "That's just not good." "He's too bold, I know. My dad's going to need to deal with." I stopped. He was staring again, this time at the ground behind me. I turned to see what had caught his attention. "Don't," he began. Too late. Having stepped away from whatever Marv had dropped, I could now see it more clearly through the long grass. Or see part of it. Fingers. I stood there, thoughts stuttering. I had to be wrong. Of course I was wrong. I'd seen a deer foreleg a hairless. Oh God! I stepped forward. Rafe didn't try to stop me, and we both crouched for a better look. There, in the grass, lay a human forearm. Only 2 fingers were still attached. The rest and most of the arm itself had been. My gorge rose. I swallowed hard and closed my eyes. Rafe's fingers touched my elbow. "Give me your phone," he said. I've got it." I straightened and took a deep breath. Then I took out my cell phone, opened it, and swore, the words coming out shaky. "No signal," I said. "We need to get back down the cliff." I glanced at the arm. "We can't leave that, though. A scavenger will get it. We need something to carry it in." Rafe plucked the hem of his shirt, like he was ready to pull it off. He stopped, though, and said, "We can grab my jacket." His shirt would have been easier, but it was white, and I guess he was thinking he couldn't afford a new one if it got stained. Yet our jackets were also at the bottom of the cliff, which didn't solve the problem. Finally, we agreed to have him stand watch over the arm while I zipped down the cliff, made the call, and came back. That was the plan anyway. Only I couldn't get reception at the bottom either. So I tied our jackets around my waist and went up. I should have only brought my jacket. If it was stained, my parents would buy me a new one. Rafe, however, insisted on using his. He did let me help get the arm on it, which consisted of one person holding the jacket and the other rolling the forearm with a stick, and, yes, it was as bad as it sounds. The only thing that made it bearable was that, if I didn't look at the fingers, it was chewed too badly to tell it was an arm. On second thought, no, that didn't make it better. My nightmares would definitely have fresh fodder now. But I managed to help Rafe without puking, and he didn't suggest I let him handle it by himself. I appreciated that. He carried it, though, which was fine by me. I took guard duty armed with a stick and scanning the forest for any flash of fur. It was a quiet walk. We knew we were carrying the remains of a person killed by a cougar. Someone was dead and we had no idea who it was. For now, it was easier to think this was an anonymous corpse from some other town, scavenged by the cougar. We'd almost reached the top of the cliff when Rafe turned, his face lifting slightly, catching the wind. "Do you smell that?" he asked. I could smell the arm, that was for sure. That was another thing I was trying not to think about. When I turned, though, I caught the same stink of decomposition on the breeze. "We should take a look," I said. The stink got stronger with each step. Finally, in the trees ahead, I saw a cougar cache a kill covered with branches. I noticed something blue dangling from a branch. A torn piece of denim. "It's the rest," Rafe said, his voice low, respectful. When I stepped forward, his fingers closed around my arm. "That's close enough, Maya. Chief Carling can take it from here. If the cat comes back and smells us this close, he'll move the body. I need to get a look. See if I swallowed. Recognize the victim. I know everyone around here." His fingers slid down to my hand, squeezing it, then he walked beside me as I approached the cache. I could see dark hair at one end, so I veered that way. It looked like a woman, but pine needles blocked the face. I bent and pulled a branch back and I saw the face then, dark eyes open, staring into nothing. It was Mina Lee. The rest of the audiobook will be continued in the next episode. Join us on Patreon for early access or more great audiobooks. A link is provided in the video description.